Hello， 大家好。今天我来演示我们同时来做3件事，就是一个打游戏，一个看动画片，一个学英文，听英文那我是怎么做到呢？就是我打开一个游戏这个游戏是一个叫 Retro Game， 就是一个专门打老游戏的平台。我们用手柄来控制玩这个老游戏，然后呢，把它的声音关掉，把这个游戏的声音关掉，然后我们同时看一个动画片，这个动画片叫做《太空战记》也把它声音关掉，反正他说日文嘛，你也听不懂，声音关掉，动画片的声音关掉，游戏的声音关掉，打开学英文的这个声音，让我们来听一下这个英文。
Today, I'll take you through some essential top tips to help you sound more British when you speak. So, if you want to learn a British accent, then this is the video for you. Some people think that the British RP accent is quite hard to pull off, but actually, if you follow a couple of simple rules, then it becomes a lot easier. If you're new here, my name's Izzy. I'm a final year medical student at Cambridge University. This video has been very highly requested in my comments and DMs. In this video, I'm going to be talking about some key points where you can really make your accent sound a lot more British. I'll go over 5 main points today, which will be word choice, consonants, vowels, intonation, and finally how to practice to perfect your British accent. Whether this is for acting or if you just want to learn how to speak with more of an RP accent, then hopefully this video can help you out. I'll particularly focus on the vowels and the consonants, as these are the areas where you can really make the most immediate impact and immediate difference to the way that your accent sounds. Today we'll only be going through tips to speak with a modern or modified RP accent, which is just my accent. This is how I speak. RP stands for Received Pronunciation and is sort of traditionally known as the standard accent for people in the south of England. This standard southern British English is sort of a bit like the accent that BBC broadcasters speak with, so sometimes it's also known as BBC English or Queen's English. It is predominantly spoken in the south of England, but obviously it's not confined to this geographical area, and there are so many different varieties of British English even within the south. So if you're interested in learning an accent that sounds a bit like mine, then keep watching this video. So the first thing that you want to pay attention to when you're trying to sound more British is actually word choice and vocabulary. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but it's really important to make sure the words you're choosing are the British version rather than, let's say, the American version. So just some examples here would be, for example, trash in American English is known as rubbish in the UK. Some other examples include pants versus trousers, which is what we would say in Britain. There are also certain words or expressions that just sound quintessentially British, such as the adjective knackered to describe when you're really tired. I'm absolutely knackered. Or phrases like, that's a good shout. When speaking to an American friend of mine, I sometimes use this phrase and he's a bit baffled, like, oh, what does that mean? What does good shout mean? It just means that's a good idea, essentially. So by choosing your words and phrases carefully, you can sound more British in this way. The second thing to really pay attention to is your consonants. So consonants are an area where British English, particularly RP, really distinguishes itself from other forms of English accents. There are 2 key points that I want to address here. Firstly is the T sound. Make sure that you enunciate all of your T's. This T sound should be clearly enunciated at the beginning, in the middle, and also between words. So examples of this would be the word to or teacher. You want to really make sure that that T sound is there, but it's not a very hard T that you spit out. It's like a sort of light T. So it's not like teacher, it's just teacher. And you can clearly hear that T sound. A huge difference between American and British sounding English is the T in the middle of words, such as words like water. So the word water in RP, the T in the middle is clearly a T. Apologies in advance for my American accent. I can't really do an American accent, but I'll try to just give you an example. In American English, they might say it more like a D, like water. Other examples of this include the word better versus better, or city versus city. So make sure that those are really coming out clearly. Next is T's between words. So for example, the phrase let it be. The T isn't a D sound. Again, it's this making sure that it's clearly a T sound and not a D sound. So I feel like sometimes in American English people say let it be, almost like a D, but this is let it be. Or another example, it is what it is. So I'm just going to put a phrase on screen now, and I'd like you to read it out in a British accent, including all the T's. So that would be pronounced, it is what it is. One thing you may be wondering about is something known as the glottal stop. So in some variations of British English, the glottal stop is used in place of a T. So for example, the word water with a glottal T would sound like water. So it's where the T isn't just fully removed. It's like, for example, and you're about to put the T in, but then there's a tension in your throat that just cuts off the sound. I would say that this isn't really part of RP English, so if that's the accent you're aiming for, then glottal stops are not something that you need to worry about. But I thought I would just address them as they are a very widespread part of other forms of British English. A very commonly cited example of this is, I want a bottle of water, which with glottal stop T's instead of normal T's would sound like...
A bottle of water?
A bottle of water. I can't do it. The second point in consonants is the R sound. So often the R sound is actually dropped in British English. While the T's are always pronounced, the R's are sometimes dropped. This is known as a non-rhotic. Essentially in RP, you only pronounce the R sound when there is a vowel sound after the R. In examples such as the word British, you do pronounce the R sound because there's an I sound right after it, a vowel sound. But in other examples, such as the word teacher, has an R on the end of it, but there's no vowel sound after the R. So we don't actually enunciate the R sound itself. So for example, in American English, sometimes you'll hear something more like teacher.
What?
Obviously my American accent's terrible, so please forgive me for that. So some examples of where this R is dropped off and replaced with a diphthong vowel, essentially a kind of longer version of the vowel, are words like doctor, teacher, water, better, learn, work, party, cart, bird. So dropping off the R sounds where there's no vowel sound after the R is really important to developing that RP sounding accent. Next, coming to vowel sounds. Vowel sounds are so important to nailing a British accent, or any accent for that matter. So I'll be going over a couple of sounds that are quintessentially British that you can incorporate into your own speaking. There are a set number of key vowels, including diphthongs, that are important to learn, and there's a table of them. I'll include one over here that you can just use for reference. There are so many more thorough accent learning resources online if you're interested in that. So, the first vowel sound that is super important to British English is the schwa sound. This is the most common vowel in British RP English, so it's super important to nail this as it's absolutely everywhere. And examples that include it include similar words that we've used before actually, things like teacher, that at the end, water, doctor, luck, that in luck. Even the word the itself has that sound. And to make this vowel sound, you essentially want to have a fairly relaxed mouth with your tongue just resting in your mouth. And you just want to go The next vowel is the short O sound. This sound is very British and is included in words such as hot, stop, slot, got. All of these sorts of words with this sound. In, for example, American English, the word stop might be more pronounced as stop rather than stop. So this is a very round shape with the mouth, with the lips slightly pushing out and the tongue just slightly relaxed and flattened in the mouth. The next vowel is the long A sound. This is like an R sound, which is present in words such as grass, bath, father, rather, fast, last. To make the sound, open your mouth quite wide, almost like you're going to the dentist. Flatten your tongue and slide it back a little bit and make this R sound. That kind of sound. And just practice. Last, past, bath, grass. And this is in contrast to an almost hard A, where in some areas of Britain, in British English, instead of having this long A sound, which is present in RP English, there's almost like an sound instead. So instead of bath, it will be bath. The next vowel is a big round O sound. So this is present in words such as hello, no, slow, low, go, halo, zero. And this is actually a diphthong where there's actually almost two sounds within the vowel, and the vowel changes over time. That's what a diphthong is, essentially. It's sometimes known as a gliding vowel. So the sound goes from O, O. It's like your mouth closes down as you go through the vowel O. To make this sound, your tongue starts off nice and relaxed with your mouth slightly open in a round shape. And then as you progress through the vowel, you kind of imagine it kind of closing down. Oh, oh, that kind of thing. And I think this one's quite important to nail because it's in the word hello. And I feel like sometimes people try to mimic the British English accent, the RP accent, with the word hello. And the really key thing that distinguishes whether they've nailed it or not is this O sound at the end. So some people almost overemphasize it and they go, hello, but that's almost closing it down too fast. It needs to be a very gradual O, quite relaxed O. And it's also not a single sound. It's not oh. Some people say hello or hello.
Hello.
Hello. It's not that. It's hello. Finally, the fourth thing to pay attention to is the rhythm and intonation. This is so important, but it's really hard to teach in a few quick tips. It's something that you need to really absorb over time. And this includes all the stresses and emphases on the word and essentially the musicality of the language. And this really contributes to making you sound more British and also making you sound more understandable as well. So how can you practice all of this? I would recommend listening to plenty of podcasts or radio shows and also watching TV shows, movies or YouTube videos with people speaking in this accent. And what you can do is a technique called mirroring, which is essentially where you play or listen to them say a phrase and then you pause whatever it is and then you say it back. You repeat this process a few times to try to imitate their accent as closely as possible. And one thing that can help, and lots of students that I've had have found helpful, is if you focus specifically on a few vowels or a few consonants at a time. So for example, if you start with a sentence and you specifically focus on making sure you nail all the T's or making sure that you nail all the O sounds. And then you can kind of build up from there so it doesn't feel too overwhelming or paralyzing, because it's a lot to try to change an accent and it does take a lot of work. This technique called mirroring is actually something I used extensively when I was trying to learn Mandarin. I'll link a video over here somewhere about my experience of learning Mandarin and how I did that. But otherwise, I hope this video has been helpful or interesting in some way, and I really hope it helps you to get closer to your goal of maybe sounding more British. If you enjoyed this video, you might like this one over here where I talk a bit more about accents and language learning. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.
So for the past 20 years, I've been helping Malaysians and other Southeast Asians to speak better English.
Better English.
And through training thousands of Southeast Asians, I've discovered a very surprising truth. I've discovered that how well somebody communicates in English actually has very little to do with their English level. It has a lot to do with their attitude towards English. There are people out there who have a very, very low level of English and they can communicate very, very well. One of them that I remember was a student, a participant of mine named Faisal. He was a factory supervisor. English level very, very low. But this guy could just sit and listen to anybody very calmly, clearly, and then he could respond, absolutely express his thoughts beautifully at a very low level of English. So today I want to share with you what is so different about people like Faisal. How do they do it? And second of all, why is this so important, not only to you, but to your children, to your community, and to the future of Malaysia? And third of all, what's one thing you can do starting today if you want to speak with that calm, clear confidence that people like Faisal has? So first of all, what is so different? How do people like Faisal do it? So to answer that question, I'm going to take you back about 10 years, okay? So I was training staff at that time, and my daughter at that time was taking piano lessons. And I started to notice two really strong similarities between my daughter's attitude or thinking towards playing the piano and a lot of Malaysians' thinking or attitude towards English. Now, first of all, I should tell you, my daughter absolutely hated piano. Hated the lessons, hated practicing. This is my daughter practicing piano, okay? This is as good as it got. This is the real thing. And she dreaded going to piano lessons because to my daughter, going to piano lessons, she was filled with this sort of dread because it was all about not screwing up, right? Because like for a lot of piano students, to both my daughter and her teacher, her success in piano was measured by how few mistakes she made. Now, at the same time, I noticed that a lot of Malaysians went into English conversations with the same sort of feeling of dread, this sort of feeling that they were going to be judged by how many mistakes they were going to make and whether or not they were going to screw up. Now, the second similarity that I noticed was to do with self-image. You see, my daughter, she knew what good piano sounded like, right? Because we've all heard good piano. And she knew what her level was. And she knew how long she'd have to play for to play like that. And a lot of Malaysians, I noticed, had this idea of what good, proper English is supposed to sound like. And I see a lot of you nodding, and what their English sounded like, and how far they'd have to go to get there. And they also felt like they were, like my daughter, just bad. Bad piano player, bad English speaker, right? My English not so good lah, cannot, sorry, shaya, cannot. So I could see these similarities, but I still couldn't figure out, okay, what is it about these people like Faisal that are so different that can just do it smoothly, calmly, with confidence? And one day I discovered that answer, and I discovered it quite by chance. It was a day when my computer broke down and I had to go to a cyber cafe. Now, okay, it was my first time, and I discovered cyber cafes are disgusting places, okay? They're really gross. They're smelly, and they're filled with boys, and they're all playing noisy, violent games. They're just disgusting places. But I had to go there. So I sit down, and I start noticing this guy beside me, and I become very, very interested in this guy next to me. Now, this guy is playing this game that is basically, it's like shooting people until they die. And that's it, right? That's the game, right? And I'm noticing that this guy is not very good. He's like, in fact, terrible, right? Because I'm looking and I'm seeing like a lot of shooting and not much dying, right? But what really interested me was behind this lousy player were three of his friends sort of standing there watching him play. And what I really noticed was, even though this guy was terrible, even though his friends were watching him, there was no embarrassment. There was no feeling of being judged. There was no shyness. In fact, quite the opposite. This guy's like totally focused on the bad guy, smile on his face. All he can think about is killing these guys, right? And I'm watching him and I suddenly realized this is it. This is the same attitude that people like Faisal have when they speak English. Just like this guy, when Faisal goes into an English conversation, he doesn't feel judged. He's entirely focused on the person that he's speaking to and the result he wants to get. He's got no self-awareness, no thoughts about his own mistakes. Now, I want to share with you a real, true example to paint a picture of somebody who speaks English like they're playing piano and someone who speaks English like they're playing a computer game. And this is a true story. Happened to me. A while ago, I was in a pharmacy. I had to buy Omega. My doctor said I should get Omega. And I go to the shelf, there's tons of Omega. There's Omega that's high in DHA, Omega that's high in EPA, and I don't know which one to buy. Now, the sales rep happened to be there, and I saw she was like this well-dressed professional woman. I walk over to her, and I see this look as she sees me, this sort of, it's a look I recognize very well. her eyes go all wide. It's sort of that panic, oh my God, I got to speak to a native speaker and she's going to judge me and notice my mistakes. I go up to her and I explain my situation, which omega do I get? And she starts explaining to me everything about DHA and EPA you could possibly imagine. She speaks very quickly, goes all around in circles, and when she finishes, no idea what to buy. Right? So I turn to the girl behind the counter. Now, the girl behind the counter, I heard her before, her English level is very low. But when I walk over to her, this girl, there's no fear. In fact, she's just looking at me. You know that look? Like, yeah, okay, so how? Right. Yeah, I've been in Malaysia a long time. So I go up to her and I explain the problem, EPA, DHA. She looks at me, she says, okay, EPA for heart. DHA for brain. Your heart okay or not? So I said, yeah. I said my heart is really, I think it's pretty good. She says, your brain okay or not? I said, yeah, no. No, my brain is not as good as it used to be. She looked, she said, okay la, you take omega DHA, can? Problem solved, right? So we've got two different kinds of communicators. We've got the one who's got a high level, but totally focused on herself and getting it right, and therefore very ineffective. We've got another one, low level, totally focused on the person she's talking to and getting a result. Effective. And therein lies the difference. Now, why is this distinction so important, not just to you, to your children, but to the future of Malaysia and countries like Malaysia? And to answer that, let's take a look at who actually is speaking English in the world today, okay? So if we looked at all of the English conversations in the whole world taking place right now on planet Earth, we would see that for every native speaker, like me, there are 5 non-native speakers. And if we listen to every conversation in English on planet Earth right now, we would notice that 96% of those conversations involved non-native English speakers. Only 4% of those conversations are native speaker to native speaker. This is not my language anymore. This language belongs to you. It's not an art to be mastered. It's just a tool to use to get a result. And I want to give you a real life example of what English is today in the world. Real English today. This is another true story. I was at a barbecue a little while ago. This was a barbecue for engineers from all over the world. And they were making hot dogs. Now, some of the hot dogs were regular hot dogs, and some were these cheese hot dogs, you know, with the cheese in the middle. French engineer is cooking the hot dogs, and he turns to this Korean engineer and he says, would you like a hot dog? And the Korean guy says, yes, please. He says, do you want the cheese? And the Korean guy looks around at the table. He says, I no see cheese. French guy says, the hot dog contains the cheese. Korean guy doesn't understand him, right? So the French engineer tries again. The hot dog is making from with the cheese. Korean guy still doesn't understand. He tries again. He says, the hot dog is coming from. No, the cheese is coming from the hot dog. Korean guy cannot understand. Now, this Japanese engineer who's been listening to this conversation turns to the Korean engineer and he says, cheese integrator. He understands. Okay? Everybody understands. So this is what English is today. It's just a tool to play around with to get a result, like a computer game. Now, the challenge is that we know in schools all around the world, right? English is not really being taught like it's a tool to play with. It's still being taught like it's an art to master. And students are judged more on correctness than on clarity. Some of you might remember the old comprehension exam in school. Does anybody remember in school when you would get a question about a text that you read? You'd have to read through some text, right? And then answer a question to show that you understood the text. And this may have happened to you, that you showed that you understood the text, but you got a big X because you made a little grammar mistake. Like this student. Now this student clearly understood paragraph 4, but no, not correct, because he left the letter N off the word environment. But in the real world, what would matter? In the real world, what would matter is, did you understand the email, or did you understand your customer, so that you can go ahead and take action? Now the problem that I see here, over and over, is that people take the attitude they developed about English in school and they bring it into their adult life and into their work. And if you're in a stressful situation and you're having a conversation and you're trying to give a result to someone and say it correctly, your brain multitasks. It cannot do two things at once. And what I see is the brain just shutting down. And you may recognize these 3 symptoms of the brain shutting down. The first one is that your listening goes. Someone's talking to you and you're so busy thinking about how you're going to respond and express yourself correctly, you don't actually hear what the other person said. And I can see a lot of nodding in the audience. The second thing to go is your speaking. Your mind sort of shuts down and that vocabulary you do know just disappears and the words don't come out. The third thing to go is your confidence. And the worst thing about this is you may only be confident because you cannot express yourself clearly, but to the person talking to you, they may misunderstand this as a lack of confidence in your ability to do the job, to perform. So if you want to speak English like Faisal with that great confidence, here's the one thing that you can do. When you speak, don't focus on yourself. Focus on the other person and the result you want to achieve. Imagine a next generation of Malaysians, all with that wonderful confidence in communication that Faisal has at any level of English. Because let's remember that English today, it's not an art to be mastered. It's just a tool to use to get a result. And that tool belongs to you. Thank you.
Today we're going through some science-based, tried and tested study tips that will help you study smarter, not harder. My name's Izzy. I'm a final year medical student at Cambridge University, and I just finished all of my Cambridge Medical School exams and managed to pass them all. So these tips are pretty much how I survived Cambridge Medical School. There were some ups, there were some downs, but we made it. These tips and tricks will be applicable whether you are studying medicine or studying another course or even learning a language or something else like that. So I study Mandarin in my free time, and these tips are very applicable to that as well. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So firstly, why am I making this video? Learning how to learn is actually so important, and it literally supercharges all of the rest of your time that you spend studying. It essentially acts as a productivity multiplier on all of your life, and yet we're never really taught how to learn while we're at school, but it's just sort of assumed that we'll kind of figure it out along the way. I personally spent years focusing on study techniques that have actually been shown by psychological studies to be relatively inefficient for the ultimate goal of understanding and memorization, such as taking notes, rereading or highlighting, especially rereading and highlighting. I absolutely loved doing those. So I'll go through the 9 study techniques that got me through Cambridge Medical School. I'll firstly explain them, and then I'll go through some practical tips and examples of ways that you can integrate them into your own studying. The first thing I would say